Your blood boils uncontrollably at your temples, your breathing becomes short, and your brain goes into total meltdown when someone decides to twist your words and attack your character in the middle of a room. In that exact millisecond of neurochemical chaos, you are absolutely certain that you are fighting for your dignity, dumping logical arguments and irrefutable proofs on the table to clear your name. But the dark science of human anatomy proves the exact and terrifying opposite. Every time you open your mouth to justify yourself or counterattack a moralistic aggressor, you are not proving your innocence before the jury. You are merely executing, obediently and pathetically, the invisible code that this parasite implanted in your nervous system. You have become a biological puppet, bleeding out your vitality and personal power in a war that was already lost, the exact millisecond you decided to react. Concealed beneath the veneer of modern civility is a mechanism of social annihilation so primitive and lethal that corporations and etiquette manuals have tried to bury it at all costs. It doesn't require a single milligram of charisma. It demands no knowledge of Socratic rhetoric, and it discards any vulgar attempt at physical intimidation. It is an anomaly in the matrix of primate behavior, a surgical and freezing tool of psychological torture used by the greatest architects of global power throughout the centuries. The mastery of this specific architecture inverts the gravity of any hostile environment, causing a high-voltage short circuit in the synapses of anyone who tries to humiliate you. You won't just win the confrontation. You will force your predator to swallow their own poison, crumbling their sanity in real time and making them beg for a way out that you will never grant. The overwhelming majority of the civilian population lacks the necessary molecular weight to withstand the coldness of this technique. The common man feels his stomach turn just by catching a glimpse of the lethal demand of this move on the corporate or family battlefield. But the mechanics of absolute domination operate under rules that despise your morality and your comfort. What I am about to put inside your mind in the next few minutes will completely carbonize everything you think you know about human relations. Prepare yourself for the dissection of your own weakness. Because the exact instant you understand what the obscure mechanical detail is that forces the adversary to commit social suicide without you having to lift a single finger, your perception of the reality around you will be shattered forever. The Aegean Sea exhaled the thick stench of salt, human sweat, and rotting wood in the year 75 before the turn of our era. The cold wind cut across the deck of a Cilician pirate ship, sweeping the rocky coast with an icy indifference. A young Roman patrician, in the prime of his 25 years, found himself chained to the mainmast. The oxidized metal chewed at the skin of his wrists. The rusted blade, held by a barbarian with rotten teeth and the breath of dead fish, rested millimeters from his jugular, dictating the absolute price of his earthly existence. 20 talents of silver. This is the exact millisecond where ancestral biology imposes its tyrannical and inescapable law upon the flesh. The common man trembles to his bones. The common man feels his sphincter give way, his vision darken, and despair flood his bloodstream. He bargains. He begs for mercy, cries copiously, offers his own clothes, the dignity and honor of his lineage, in exchange for a few more years of pathetic breath on the face of the earth. But the reaction of that particular prisoner broke the fabric of reality and the physics of power around him. He didn't break into a cold sweat. He didn't look down at the floor in submission. He laughed. A slow, cold, metallic laugh, terrifyingly devoid of any basic primate preservation instinct. He looked the Cilician captain in the eyes and demanded, with the unwavering voice of an emperor, that his captors ask for 50 talents, for 20 was an insult to his market value. During the next 38 days of captivity on the rough sea, the ship turned into a sadistic laboratory and a brutal psychological theater, where the iron chains at his heels became mere stage props. He didn't argue with the pirates to prove he was important or loved in Rome. He told them to shut up with verbal violence when he wanted to sleep on the filthy floor. He wrote complex speeches about politics and law, recited poems in Latin on the deck stained with dried blood. When those men, brutalized by marginal life and illiteracy, failed to understand the intricate meter of his words, he didn't stay quiet out of fear of imminent death. He called them ignorant barbarians, wild beasts incapable of appreciating true culture. He didn't defend himself from threats. He didn't justify himself against drawn knives. He occupied the immense vacuum left by the absence of fear. His silence in the face of daily intimidation wasn't a defensive pause or a flight mechanism. It was a weapon of mass destruction, calculated millimeter by millimeter. A surgical and lethal demonstration that power does not reside with whoever holds the firearm or the knife, but solely and exclusively with whoever dictates the heart rate and the emotions of the environment. The primitive brains of the captors went into gravitational collapse. What should have been a terrified and docile hostage became the indisputable authority figure of the vessel. The sepulchral silence and the absolute refusal to react as prey altered the primitive hierarchy of the pack's mind. They began to serve him. Sometime after being released, he chartered ships, hunted down every single one of those pirates, and crucified them on the coast, exactly as he had promised during the days when the pirates thought they were in control. He slit their throats before the crucifixion to spare them prolonged suffering. Not out of kindness, but out of a terrifying bureaucratic coldness. The overwhelming and sickening majority of you, placed under a tiny fraction of that pressure in your mediocre day-to-day lives, would have vomited rivers of words of despair. You would have tried to argue with your tormentor, justify your importance in the world, prove from A to Z to bloodthirsty criminals that you deserved to live because you are good people, pay your taxes, and love your dogs. The modern human brain has been miserably domesticated into the worship of noise and the phobia of the social vacuum. When you are attacked in your workplace, confronted at a family gathering, or ridiculed in an internet comment section, your cerebral amygdala undergoes an immediate hijacking. It shoots a chemical storm of cortisol and adrenaline straight into your veins. Your most animalistic and pathetic biological instinct screams in your eardrums for you to open your mouth and counterattack, to defend yourself, to clear your imaginary name. It is an aesthetically repulsive sight. Biology turns you into a pathetic puppet of your own sickening need for external validation. If you feel that uncontrollable neurochemical itch to explain every single one of your actions, if you feel your chest burn when someone twists your intentions and you need to rush to clear up the facts before any biped who questions you, get out of here right now. Close this video. Delete this channel from your browsing history. This freezing territory was not designed for your emotional fragility. Go back to the safety of the pen. Go back to the endless and exhausting cycle of useless arguments where people bleed out their vital energy, barking at each other in search of a virtual acceptance that will never fill the void in their lives. But if you understand that the true mechanics of power operate in the surgical denial of predictable emotions, stay. If you have the bone structure and the steel spine required to master primate instincts and use other people's minds as a tactical playground, do what must be done. Subscribe. Welcome to the clinical, amoral, and mathematical reality of Mr. Nan. The absolute and unquestionable dominance of an argument is never born from a superior point or an enlightened rhetoric. Logic does not govern ego-driven primates. The power to crush the opponent is born from the architectural deconstruction of the battlefield itself. The apex of real power is to make the confrontation itself an irrelevant activity. Take a mental magnifying glass and meticulously analyze the people who orbit your social and professional ecosystem. There is a very specific, almost viral category of human parasite that survives solely on the predatory act of correcting and judging others. They possess a sickening, almost canine sense of smell to find the most insignificant and microscopic flaw in your body language, an invisible semantic error in your speech, a casual slip-up at a dinner party, an opinion slightly misaligned with the consensus of the herd. They sniff out this drop of blood in the water like starving great white sharks and make absolutely sure to expose this little defect of yours under the brightest stage lights. They routinely dress themselves in the white, flawless fabric of unwavering ethical superiority. They point a trembling finger at your slightest stumble with the relentless and theatrical fury of a divine and untouchable magistrate. They love public stages. They feed on audiences, messaging groups with dozens of spectators, comment boxes, and corporate meeting roundtables. They don't attack in the dark. They need the spotlight for the performance to make sense. But obscure behavioral psychology has no time for good intentions. It tears off this flesh mask with extreme violence. This perpetual moral crusade, this continuous performance of unassailable purity, is nothing more than a cheap facade, architected by the trembling hands of terror and inadequacy. The incessant attack on your minor flaws is the biological survival mechanism of a human being who is intimately terrified of their own decomposition in front of the mirror. The mental architecture of these people is a landfill overflowing with resentments, unconfessable failures, hidden vices, and shames buried 6 feet under. They are disgusted by who they are when they close their bedroom door and lay their head on the pillow. By putting you on the public stand for a tiny and often fabricated detail, they experience a quick and pathetic injection of dopamine and artificial relevance. The equation is dark and parasitic. They desperately need you to react. They require your indignation to validate the attack. The dirty oxygen that nourishes and keeps this species' ecosystem alive is your visceral need for defense. When you lose the rhythmic control of your breathing, when the pitch of your voice goes up half an octave, when your eyebrows furrow and you try, with logical and desperate arguments, to fend off the petty accusation they dropped in your lap, you have committed tactical suicide. You have just legitimized the false authority of your aggressor. You have voluntarily ripped out the master key to your mental fortress and handed it, bloodied, into the dirty hands of a coward who has no real power over you whatsoever. The tactical execution of profound and non-reactive indifference alters the rules of thermodynamics inside a closed room. When this artificial court of inquisition is set up against you in the middle of a meeting or a dinner, When the trap is activated and everyone's eyes turn to your mouth, waiting for your shameful defense, you will do exactly the opposite of what the civility manuals dictate. You will take a sharp pair of scissors and cut the high-tension cables that feed the interaction. You are not going to explain yourself. You are not going to let out a nervous laugh. You are not going to attack the other person's character back, because whoever counterattacks has already admitted to being wounded by the initial strike. You will become a black hole in the center of the room, swallowing all the light and energy in the environment. You will keep your neck musculature rigid, your chin strictly parallel to the floor. You will make heavy, dark, and prolonged eye contact in the exact center of the pupils of the one who uttered the attack. And you will let chronological time freeze and rot right then and there. A dense silence, thick, almost suffocating. The kind of silence that makes the hum of fluorescent lights seem deafening. You will create a social vacuum that shatters and pulverizes the neurological expectation of the primate brain on the other side of the table. The attacker's brain secreted reward chemicals 30 seconds before speaking, morbidly anticipating your stutter, your flush, and your public shame. By withholding any minimal trace of a word or expression of defense, you trigger a high-voltage short circuit in their synapses. The oppressive silence forces the creature to listen to the echo of its own poison. It forces them to hear the volume of their own hysteria bouncing off the walls of the room. Without the shield of your verbal resistance to support the aggression, their provocation suddenly sounds ridiculous, childish, noisy, and minuscule before everyone. Consider the dark architecture of an isolated room. In the center, a solid wood table supporting a heavy, varnished chessboard, bathed in the pale and dim light of a single metal lamp hanging from the ceiling. The game of pieces is at an unbearable level of tension. The hands of the clock sound like striking blades. One of the players, a predator cloaked in shadows, keeps his facial muscles completely paralyzed and his breathing at a lethargic pace, like a reptile conserving energy. Without warning, without a single tremor in his fingers, he takes his most lethal piece, the Black Queen, and drags it with sonic brutality to the middle of the board, throwing it directly into the adversary's killing field on purpose. He surrenders his most precious asset without a fight. The opponent, on the other side, widens his eyes and, panting heavily, captures the piece immediately, thinking he has found a fatal flaw in the master's defense. But the seconds pass, and the joy of the capture does not come. The dopamine does not flood the brain. What slides down his parched throat like corrosive acid is pure psychological terror. The primitive and irrational panic that settles into the opponent's guts doesn't come from the isolated change in the board's positioning. It comes from the macabre realization of the inhuman coldness of the one who planned and executed that sacrifice without blinking. What is this man in the dark seeing that my limited mind cannot grasp? What kind of infinite abyss has he just sneakily opened beneath my feet, while I, like an idiot, looked greedily at the sacrificed piece? What is the level of insanity and control of someone who throws their own protection in the trash just to make me go crazy with the invisible possibilities? It is exactly this existential, dense, and irreversible damage that your silence causes in the mental architecture of a moralistic parasite. When you fall silent, you execute the queen sacrifice in the real world. You publicly discard the vital need to be right before the damp eyes of the herd. You rip your verbal vanity from your chest, throw it on the dirty floor of the hall, and step on it with a combat boot, crushing it, leaving the aggressor completely paralyzed and disoriented by your monstrous, freezing, and haunting lack of insecurity. He doesn't know how to fight a ghost. The words spoken at the wrong time, the murmur in an attempt to clarify your intention, is a severe and fatal hemorrhage of power. It is you opening your wallet to pay exorbitant emotional taxes to fund the chronic madness of whoever is trying to put an invisible collar around your neck. When someone tries to cover your name in mud using cheap, fifth-rate false moralisms at a meeting table or in a family group, that person has just activated, on the shallowest anthropological level possible, a primitive ritual of wild chimpanzees shaking branches, baring their teeth, and screaming for territory on a dead tree in the middle of the savannah. If you, in a lapse of intellectual weakness, try to use logic, Enlightenment reason, or Socratic dialectics to reverse the hysterical attack of a rabid biped, you have slipped from your position as an observer, fallen onto the muddy jungle floor, and agreed to roll in your own feces begging for attention and universal justice. Justice does not exist in power dynamics. There is only leverage and crushing. By violently locking down your vocal cords, you usurp the gravity of the room. You paralyze the linear perception of time. You instantly rise up like a colossal and impenetrable wall of black granite, against which all their aggressive energy and all their envy disguised as virtue merely crashes and crumbles into useless rubble at your feet. The surgical core of this technique requires an inhuman and rigorous biomechanical control of your face. Do not allow a superior smile to leak from the corner of your lips, for that would demonstrate ego and engagement in the futile game. Do not let your jaw muscles clench or pulse with suppressed rage, as that would emit the clear signal that the poisoned arrow pierced your skin and reached your bloodstream. Your face, from the neck up, must be transmuted into a clinical and dead surface. A morgue mirror, assessing the despair and the pathetic choreography of the screaming biped in front of you with the exact same scientific curiosity and absolute detachment of a virologist in a level 4 biosafety lab analyzing the chaotic behavior of a microscopic bacteria on a glass slide. This dark, intentional, and unbreakable mutism transmits a single, overwhelming telepathic command, penetrating straight into the defensive subconscious trenches of the one who made the fatal mistake of attacking you. The non-negotiable command that the mere physiological existence of this individual on the surface of the earth is overwhelmingly irrelevant, useless, and lacks the critical mass or molecular weight necessary to cause the remotest disturbance to your chemical and structural peace. Pay close attention to the physics of time. The atmosphere around you will start to rot and change density in exactly 10 or 15 seconds. That is how long the human brain takes to collapse under the vacuum. The silence you anchored in the environment will begin to pierce the accuser's eardrums like needles of ice. The atmospheric pressure in the room will drop drastically. To manage to survive the deep social asphyxiation and the drowning on dry land that you generated without moving a single muscle, he himself, the arrogant aggressor from seconds ago, will speak again. His system will crash. He will frantically try to fill the black abyss you opened on the table. He will attempt, in a pitiful and embarrassing way, to soften the words he just uttered. He will let out a short, weird, breathless laugh, stumbling over his own syntactic syllables, bleeding perceived authority, charisma, and power with every millisecond of stuttering. begging with wide eyes for a single sentence from you, a nod, an interjection that might break the macabre spell and relieve the public torture to which he voluntarily submitted himself. And you? You are going to keep denying it. You are not going to hand him the rope to climb out of the bottom of the well. You are going to let him drown in his own saliva. And then the brutal pendulum of reality swings back against your own flesh. The inevitable hour of the shadow audit has arrived. The moment to rip off the bandages from your own infected wounds without anesthesia and have the grotesque courage to look deep into your own rot. Before you try to arrogantly don the polished armor of the flawless dark-suited strategist, confront, without averting your gaze, the fragile, flabby, and pathetic image reflected in your own bathroom mirror. Lay your head down in your own court of inquisition. How many dozens of hundreds of times along your mediocre and forgettable timeline have you acted exactly, step by step, like the rabid and moralistic worm of this very same equation? Your ego is built out of thin, dampened tissue paper. When you, in your immense systemic irrelevance, felt ignored by the boss, belittled by your wife or husband, left aside in the friend group, or diminished in a bakery line, how many times did you not frantically scour the archives of your memory, searching for a mistake, a hypocrisy, a minimal structural flaw in the life of the person next to you, in order to attack them morally, drag them through the mud, and by doing so, try to soothe the chronic pains of your own hollow chest? You are quick to cry out to the heavens for limitless empathy and understanding when it is you who commits a grotesque flaw. You weep like a crucified martyr, building rhetorical and monumental defenses based solely on your modern exhaustion, your accumulated stress, and your pure and immaculate good intentions that nobody, absolutely nobody, could see in practice. But invert the lens. When the miscalculation, the character flaw, or the fall occurs across the street, the scythe you hold in your hands has not the slightest shadow of mercy, remorse, or context. You decapitate without asking why. You save heavy quotes on your phone. You hoard personal development jargon in hidden folders. You whisper under your breath, like an anesthetized parrot, poorly understood excerpts about ancient stoicism and Roman discipline, all to pretend on the internet and in hipster coffee shops that you don't feel the mundane pains tearing at your soul. You use secular literature as a cheap band-aid to cover up your emotional incompetence. The palpable reality, the raw fabric of the facts you refuse to admit in therapy, is that a simple and minuscule sarcastic criticism fired off by an envious colleague in the hallway of your company, or a microscopic and often unintentional offense inside the living room of your own home, holds enough military power to strip away your sleep for 3 nights in a row. You are made of shattered glass. You lock yourself in the shower in the morning, with the hot water running down your tense back, and you shower, physically trembling with anger and resentment. You spend 35 minutes under the water, compulsively formulating in your schizophrenic head 100 different ways to destroy with lethal arguments whoever offended you 24 hours ago. Winning imaginary arguments where you are always the unquestionable genius of rhetoric. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the microscopic anatomy of true human weakness, rooted in your DNA. You are not, and are light years away from being, the cold and superior mind navigating unperturbed in the ocean of contemporary chaos. You are the irrational prey, thrashing about and tearing your own skin in the invisible and sticky webs of perpetual emotional reactivity. True behavioral superiority, applied Machiavellianism, and real stoic impassivity are not the contents of a 2-hour podcast you listen to in traffic, pretending to be cultured. It is molten steel injected directly into the spine. It is having the cold blood to look at the mediocre attempted attack of another primate and decree mentally, in a purely mathematical, silent, and lethal manner, that your lifespan is a stupidly expensive, rare, and irreplicable asset to be diluted funding the mental instability and childhood deprivations of an absolute stranger disguised as the judge of the universe. The architecture and the relentless governance of martial silence require wiring in the central nervous system that 99.9% of the human biomass walking the streets couldn't bear to carry for half an hour without going into a psychotic collapse. The entire society around you agonizes in a psychiatric hospital bed of global proportions. They are intubated, networked to plastic devices in the palms of their hands that fire off uninterrupted noises, colorful alert notifications, and synthetic stimuli of cheap dopamine into their tired retinas. Everyone, from the janitor to the aging billionaire, wants the last word. They all possess the enslaving need to plant their blood-stained flag of moral reason in mud-rotted arguments that have never altered and will never alter absolutely anything in the complex macroeconomic dynamics of political influence, warfare, or the control of capital accumulation across the globe. They want to win the war of words, while the real empires steal the resources right beneath their feet. You love the deafening, melodic, and comforting sound of your own chronic indignation, and run, terrified, from the cold, heavy, and visceral mutism of someone who has the mechanics of power rooted in their bones. You, sitting there with your shoulders hunched, looking at a screen emitting blue light directly into your eyeballs. Do you really have the audacity to believe you possess the mortuary coldness necessary to assassinate your chronic need to show off and justify your pathetic existence in every social interaction? Millennia-old biology brutally disagrees with your optimistic self-assessment. The impersonal statistical numbers clearly predict that tomorrow morning, around 9 o'clock, you will bite down hard on the very next rusted bait that gets thrown onto your office desk or slyly tossed into your cell phone. The nauseating habit of constantly defending and justifying yourself is not a personality trait that gets resolved with a colorful covered self-help book. It is a severe, systemic, and purulent infection rooted deeply in the spinal cord. And the cold extraction procedure of this disease rips off chunks of skin and causes indescribable pain to the vain ego you've nourished for decades. For this exact foundational reason, I dismiss your like. I publicly and formally repudiate your subscription to this channel if you are made up of this very same moldable mass of pawns. If the vivid mental image of locking your own lips with heavy iron padlocks, smiling internally with cruelty, and letting the thirsty, desperate ego of your opponent bleed from the neck to death in front of a dumbfounded audience causes a phobic and moralistic tightness at the base of your throat right now, it means the emergency exit door is wide open right behind you, ready for your cowardly retreat. Get out of my face. Close the browser tab. Evaporate. Put the colorful clown costume back on in the grand circus arena and continue to dance obediently and entirely out of rhythm to the music orchestrated by the floating opinions of mediocre people you secretly hate, but who have pathetically dominated your mind. But If through a momentary lapse of profound and disturbing lucidity, your real intention is to amputate the weak flesh, to cauterize your chronic fragility with fire. If you irrevocably and violently decree from this exact second to forever abandon the Pavlovian reflexes of frightened prey in the slaughterhouse, and you begin aiming to master with iron fists the invisible strings that control the nature of this primate puppet theater, then solidify your damn position right now and switch sides on the board. The decisive and calculating act of subscribing, without hesitation and without romanticism, represents the chalk line drawn on the hot asphalt between the crowd of fools who perpetually serve as a banquet for the wolves, and the elite who pull up a chair, sit down, and dictate the rules at the head of the table. The dichotomy offers no middle ground. Make your choice in silence. Kings crowned with legitimacy and brute force never feel the biological need to scream at the plebeians, attesting to their own importance, while walking through the dirty, mold-smelling corridors of the palace. Their absolute silence is the very crown weighing upon the skull. They merely lean back on the grime-covered velvet, steep their fingers into an inverted pyramid, clench their jaw, and clinically watch the chaos and the dust rise, while the rest of the schizophrenic world catches fire, goes insane, and destroys itself down to the ashes, trying to draw attention around the unwavering, silent coldness of the Black Throne.